Well, today on Media and Society, we have a look at the multiple commercial banks that are under fire for alleged price fixing involving the South African local currency. We look at how the media has handled this story since it broke. We also take a look at the official launch of the festive season by Minister of Transport Sindisiwe Chikunga. And the remains of the Southernland Nine return home. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society. I'm your host, Naledi Moleo. Of course, this is the show where we take a look at the intersection between the media and society. As usual, as we do every Sunday, the show really isn't complete without your input. So over the next hour, feel free to give us a call on the number 011-714-0661 or 0662, or tweet us using the hashtag SABC Media Society.
Standard Chartered is one of the few banks to have admitted liability for its role in what the Competition Commission called a currency manipulation cartel. It was fined 42.7 million rand, or about $2.3 million US. It also agreed to help the Competition Commission with its ongoing proceedings against other alleged participants in the case. The Commission welcomed Standard Chartered's decision and is encouraging the more than 24 other banks accused to do the same. That settles Standard Chartered's case with the Competition Commission, but the ANC says the fine is not sufficient for the harm the South African economy has experienced. It wants all the banks involved to face criminal charges. The EFF is calling for tough action against banks and the executives involved, demanding they should lose their banking licenses, directors are prosecuted and bank assets seized. It's also accused the South African Reserve Bank of failing in its role to oversee the banking sector. On the latest calls for tougher penalties, Standard Chartered had no comment. While it and Citibank NA admitted liability, lawyers for other banks say there is not sufficient evidence to prove a broad conspiracy, and some foreign banks have even denied South Africa has jurisdiction to pursue them for damages at all, saying they weren't operating in the country at the time. Stuart Smith, SABC News, London.
Well, there you have it. That's our discussion for this morning. The Competition Commission has levied accusations against multiple banks for manipulating the rand during the period from 2007 to 2013. The alleged 2013 cartel, comprising 28 local and international banks, is believed to have generated over R1 trillion through activities such as price fixing and market allocation. In recent developments, the Competition Commission reached a settlement agreement with one of the banks implicated in the foreign exchange case, namely Standard Chartered Bank. Now, as part of the settlement, Standard Chartered Bank has agreed to pay an administrative penalty of 42.7 million rand. However, some critics have argued that this penalty appears to be a mere slap on the wrist, given the perceived magnitude of the destabilization that alleged misconduct caused to the country. Well, today we take a look at how the media has handled this story since it broke. Have we done enough to help you understand what it all means? Well, joining us to discuss this via Teams, we're joined by political economist Melebohang Pheko. We're also joined by Mr. Sandile Swana, who is a political analyst. We're also joined in studio by the director of the Debate Dojo, Jamie Mighti, or Mighty Jamie as he's known to many. And we're also joined by Mr. Kanki Matabane, who is with the Black Business Council. So, a good morning to you, Jamie. I'm going to start with you because you're here, and then we'll get to our virtual guests. Can we start with your initial thoughts when the story broke? Because it was a little bit difficult to understand, but when we heard banks have potentially manipulated the South African rand, your first thoughts?
My first thoughts were that this story is massive, because what is being alleged here is economic sabotage at a very grave level. If you think about the size of the South African GDP, which is about 4.4 trillion, and you think about the fact that there has not been significant growth in the last decade in South Africa, then you look at the currency trends, where the currency has lost 44% of its value in the last 10 years, and you put those together, it looks as if this has contributed significantly to the underperformance of the South African market, the South African economy. South Africa imports a lot of finished goods and exports a lot of goods. So what this does is that on the one level, the buying power of the South African rand has been depreciated by 44%, meaning that when we are buying vehicles, when we are buying tractors, when we are buying manufacturing machines, clothes, etc., we are buying those at a depreciated rate. But when we export products, the people who are buying those minerals, who are buying those chemical products, are buying them at a cheaper rate than they would. That applies to the wine from Stellenbosch, that applies to the gold, the coal, the diamonds from South Africa. All of that is now bought at a discount while we are buying at a premium. What that means is that Treasury no longer has the same amount of money as it would have in the absence of the currency manipulation. This is why it was so significant in 2001 when it was first noted that there's some funny business with the currency. And what President Thabo Mbeki did at the time was that he initiated a rand commission. Guess what happened? The mischief stopped and the rand strengthened. It moved from 760 to 13. There was a commission, and then it moved back to 6 and 7. And that remained the same for a long period of time. So what the Competition Commission is alleging is that around about 2007, going to 2013, they noticed the mischief again. And these banks admitted guilt in America, where they paid billions worth of fines. They paid billions in America. And some of these banks then admitted guilt in South Africa. So when this second admission of guilt came through, I really thought that the media was going to do a good job in breaking it down.
So let's talk about that, because the reason why you're sitting with us today is because we did reach out to media practitioners that are in the economic and financial space. And a lot of them, I think this is a difficult conversation for them to have with us. A lot of them weren't able to come onto the platform. And one of the things you've done is you've gone onto Twitter and said, where was the media when price fixing was happening? Why did you put that question forward like that?
Because the trend has been noticeable for a very long period of time, right? So when the story broke in America, that was the first opportunity, right? As there were accusations of manipulation of currency in America, I thought the local media would then say, hang on, how does this affect us, considering that the rand dollar pair has been mentioned? So that's about 2013 to 2015. That really should have been the first time the media would have paid attention to this. And then the second thing is that we have investigative media in South Africa that has exposed, the Gupta leaks, that has exposed multiple scandals, that has even exposed people who were named in the Pandora Papers, in the Panama Papers, but seems to have missed all of the opportunities to inform the South African public about what was happening with currency.
We're going to analyze that, and I wanted you to bring the initial thoughts, but I want to bring in some of our virtual guests. Melabang Pego joins us. Of course, she's a political economist. Melabang, I want to start with you, and I want to start with your initial thoughts. The story breaks, right? Standard Chartered Bank, and there has possibly been rand manipulation. What is your first thought when you heard?
Thanks so much, Nelly, to the other guests. I think my initial thought was basically that, firstly, I'm wondering about the role of the Reserve Bank in all of this, because in all of this, it's not entirely clear why it took so long for this to pick up. And I think that we've been wondering for a while, a few economists have been wondering for a while whether the South African Reserve Bank could stand to expand its mandate to include an oversight function over the role and the strengthening and the depreciation of the rand. It's not enough to say that they are looking after basic monetary and fiscal fundamentals, including interest rates and inflation targeting, because as we understand, and as my colleague has ably enunciated, all of these things have a particular impact on local production and the flow of capital in the economy and the cost of production, the cost of consumption as well. Right. The second piece of that is also that there's a sort of a sense in which this manipulation only started a few years ago, but I think we should also appreciate that this is situated within the context of, yes, the 2001 saga, where Deutsche Bank paid about, I think, R1 billion, which is a lot more than the 43 million which has been paid right now by Standard Bank as some sort of a plea bargain. But also, it illustrates that even though some of the banks externally have been saying that there's no jurisdictional value within South Africa, that we don't have the jurisdictional tool, tools to begin to pursue overseas banks. I thought it was interesting that, and yet this has happened before, and I appreciate my colleague, but for reminding us that the court of public opinion, which is what the banks in 2001 were responding to, is incredibly important, and that the media has an important role in trying to foment some kind of balanced opinion. And thirdly, the misinformation, so it's, the 1 trillion per day, which just is not possible. And I don't think that, I think misinformation is incredibly counterproductive to the way that we are going to be able to view, efficacious and coherent solutions and thinking around this, considering that our whole GDP for a quarter is around that same amount. I don't think that 1 trillion a day, it's not even feasible. It's not even feasible globally, for that matter. So I think that those were my thoughts, that really there's firstly lots of misinformation. Secondly, we're not looking historically enough. And thirdly, we need to ask where are the tools and the systems, the checks and balances within our own jurisdiction, which could potentially at an institutional level have a more preventative approach rather than one that's of course extremely reactive.
You see, what's almost frightening about what you've just said about the misinformation, right, is that the trickle-down effect of that is a mistrust in very important institutions in our country that lead to, stability or lack thereof. And I think that's what's really important about what you've raised. Mr. Swan, I want to bring you in here. You're a political analyst. You saw the story. Did you see politics in it at all? I think your phone is I think you've muted yourself, Mr. Swan.
Okay, thank you, Naledi. Naledi, my initial thoughts and the relevant politicians of this development. Number one, my first concern was the extent to which the affected banks have got senior agency comrades in their boards and in their executive committees, which presents the risk that when they are supposed to, first of all, if the comrades are there, they are supposed to protect the country. Instead of that, we saw Maria Ramos, who has been long aligned with the ANC, and Trevor Manuel, apologizing for ABSA's role in the currency manipulation. She did not deny it, but obviously our interest is in the prevention of this type of activity. The second one who commented on this was Tito Mboweni. At the time, he said National Treasury has got no information on it. But I haven't seen a comment from Tito Mboweni saying now that the data is coming out and some of the banks are admitting to currency manipulation, what is he saying now? So to me, this development by the South African banks, which have always tried to present the South African financial services sector as squeaky clean, but we can see clearly now that indeed they are very directly involved in activities that really escalate the cost of living of ordinary South African. And lastly, I think journalists should have taken an audit to see which senior members of the ruling party sit on which boards, which employees of National Treasury are now employed by these same ex-employees of National Treasury have now been employed by the very same banks that are implicated in currency manipulation. Because I believe these elites act as political bodyguards.
Yeah, I want to bring in Mr. Kanki Matabane, because one of the things that you've done over years is really try to speak about equal opportunity for access to economic opportunity, essentially, right? If you will, your first thoughts when the story broke, and just from a business point of view, your biggest concern about who's really at a loss, and did the media do us justice even before the story broke? Let's go back to 2013.
Good morning, Naledi and the viewers of SABC.
Good morning, sir.
I think there's what we've picked up, there's a tendency amongst the media to be selective. It becomes a little bit easier when the small businesses are committing such crimes that they get exposed. Maybe it's because small businesses don't necessarily have the muscle and the capacity to advertise. So maybe there's a commercial conflict of interest there. So when it's a standard chartered, for example, it becomes a little bit complicated for the media to report on. And hence we're thanking you for having this session, because that is part of exposing this and also educating the public, because the case is not that easy. It's a little bit complicated, and I suspect that's why the Competition Commission is welcoming Standard Chartered and others who have come through and said, I'm going to pay this fine, but in addition to paying this fine, I'm going to help you with the investigation, because remember there was a chat group of these banks that planned on manipulating the rand, but it's a complicated case where it may be extremely difficult to prove. So it's important that you bring those who said we were part of this chat group, you bring them on your side in such a way that they will help you with giving more evidence. But we still believe, because Standard Chartered paid $40 million in America, but here they haven't paid that little. So from where we are sitting, the case does not fit, so the punishment does not fit in the case. But again, I suspect maybe the Competition Commission elected to say, let me encourage everyone to be on my side, so that they can be able to help me with the investigation. But maybe this also points to a different matter regarding the journalists. Maybe there's been a juniorization of newsrooms, whereby the current journalists who are there, when they see a complicated case like this, they may not necessarily understand it, so they will elect to ignore it. But also remember, as Mr. Son has mentioned, when the then Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, dismissed this case, the media just went with that. So it's important that we encourage the media to be more inquisitive and more investigative, so that they can play the role that they're supposed to play to inform the public.
Yeah. But
they should not go with the dominant a group at any given time, because when the dominant group of, for example, business says this, the media, without questioning, they go with that. But again, as I said, it raises other issues of maybe the juniorization of the newsroom.
Is it in your view? I mean, it's one thing to say the juniorization of the newsroom, but we're talking about very powerful institutions, and journalists are people. I mean, in your view, Mr. Matabane, do you think that there might be a genuine fear about what we say publicly and what we say privately?
You are right, Naledi. I suspect that is the issue, and you put it very clearly that journalists are people, and those people have got ambitions of progressing within their careers. So probably they are looking at if I become too critical, this may be career limiting, because in future when I want to go and work for these big companies, they're going to say, but you criticize us this way and that way. And remember, banks also are major shareholders and funders of many other companies, except that are not necessarily in the financial services. So maybe there's that sense of career limiting thinking to say, let me stay in my lane, let me not ruffle a lot of feathers, so that in future when I need these companies, I can easily be accepted. So that may be the issue.
Yeah, we're going to take a short break, and perhaps when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about just what that means. When you have journalists that are perhaps afraid to tackle some of those bigger discussions, what it means. Jamie earlier talked about how our rand and our currency has been undermined by 44%. That speaks about the massive responsibility that journalists have, that the trickle-down effect affects every single one of us and how we put food on the table. We're going to keep going with this discussion after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society. A lot happening this morning. We'll continue our panel discussion around rand manipulation and how the media has told that story to you. But also, big stories are happening at the moment. The Minister in the Presidency responsible for electricity, Dr. Khumbudzo Ntshaveni, will later this morning provide an update on electricity generation performance following the implementation of what has been very difficult stage 6 load shedding by Eskom. But let's also look at this. After more than a century, the Southernland Nine have returned to the town where their remains were taken many years ago. The remains of the Nine San and Khoikhoi people were removed unethically from their graves of the Presidency farm near Sutherland between 1925 and 1927 by medical student Karel Gert-Kutsia. We cross now live to our senior reporter Ulrich Hendricks, who is with Professor Elelwani Ramukondo from the University of Cape Town for more on this. Ulrich, this is a very important moment and it takes us back well over a century. Talk to us about the events that we're seeing there and what the emotions are, if any. Are people realizing the significance of this moment?
Hi, good morning, Naledi. Couldn't quite hear you there, but you know, in terms of the mood here at Southernland, we saw, and although we are talking about ancestors here, 3-4 generations back, people are quite happy about the reburial of the Southernland Nine. Of course, you see that it was part of the history. It is family members that we are talking about, but also part of the culture as well. And so, what we've seen since the bodies were brought back from UCT is that a lot of cultural aspects of has been done in preparing for the reburial of the Southernland Nine. Of course, they have, starting from Cape Town, where they were doing cleansing ceremonies there. Once they started crossing the border from the Western Cape to the Northern Cape, there was cleansing ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, of course, cleansing them, and then a welcome home ceremony here. Of course, the service will start here at this church, the VGK Church here at Southernland, at about 11 o'clock. And it will last until around 3 o'clock, and then they will be buried in a cemetery that's also around 100 years old, and where victims of the Anglo-Boer War are buried. But in terms of the bodies that were taken from that farm 100 years ago, UCT said that they conducted an audit and found that these were unethically removed, and that they were then, wanted then to conduct tests on them. But let's talk to UCT. Ma'am, so an audit said that the skeletons were taken illegally.
Welcome. I mean, I'm really grateful that you have taken the time to carry this story. I'm Professor Elelwani Ramukondo, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Transformation, Student Affairs and Social Responsiveness. So the audit was conducted. It was found that these were done unethically. That was 5 years ago. It was quite a journey. Yes, it was quite a journey. And just to clarify, this was knowledge that came to our attention in about 6 years and 10 months ago. And it is true that these remains were excavated from Sutherland, from the Grace Refuge farm, unethically, and made their way to the university, to the anatomy department in 1920.
And what sort of tests were conducted, or what sort of, what were they doing with the remains?
So what happened is that when the remains came to us, they were brought by one of the students whose parents owned the farm, and they were brought and became part of learning under the stewardship of Professor Drennan. And in bringing these remains to the university, there were some information that were collected were put on record. So the names of some of the individuals, so 6 out of the 9, the names were known, and also from where exactly they were taken. So when the university came to know about this unethically excavated human remains that made their way to our university, started engaging with the community of Southernland. That's all that we could tell at that stage, what was captured on the documents that accompanied these remains. But we knew that the information was scanty. So we needed to involve our scientists who could do real scientific assessment of the remains. So isotope analysis. We also had a historic analysis of exactly what kind of place Southernland is, so that we could link the tests with the overall context of where they were found. So in doing so, we were able to tell, for instance, the kind of lives that this individual lived and when. In particular. So one of the individuals lived in the 1300s, while the rest lived around the 1800s. Out of the 9, 5 are males, 2 are females, and 2 are children. What was also key to understand was what lives they led, and it was very clear from the tests that these individuals, the adults in particular, who were subjected to heavy labor.
Thank you very much. Professor from UCT, Vice Chancellor, of course, of Student Affairs, talking to us about when they found the remains of the Southernland Nine, and the process of bringing them back here to Southernland. Naledi?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing us that story. Ulrich Hendricks there in the Northern Cape for bringing us that story. And of course, we're going to keep a close eye on those events as we see the arrival of the remains of the Southernland Nine. But we continue our discussion here on Media and Society this morning around the issues surrounding the manipulation of the rand having captivated the attention of South Africans in the recent week. Various media platforms have reported to varying extents on the impact of this manipulation on the South African economy. But have they asked the critical questions? Were they asking those questions before the story even broke? And for that discussion, we are still joined by Melebohang Pheko, who is a political economist, Mr. Sandile Swana, who is a political analyst, director of the Debate Dojo, Mr. Jamie Mighti, or Mighty Jamie, and in studio, of course, and we're also joined via Teams by Mr. Khanki Matabane of the Black Business Council. Pheko, I want to bring it back to you at this point. One of the points that I made before we went to the ad break was the responsibility that journalists actually have, and what that does then to the trust that South Africans have. Jamie talked earlier about how the rand has been underestimated by 44%. South Africans are struggling to get by on a daily basis. I mean, this was probably one of the driest Black Fridays we've had in a very long time, right? What does this say to the South African about who they trust? Your mic is off, Melebo.
No, it's not.
Okay, there you are.
Okay, yeah. I think that's a really fantastic question. I think that the thing that's quite interesting is that there's been a deficit in trust in institutions over the last while anyway. There's a deficit in trust regarding political parties, political formations, regarding what is said about load shedding, for example, regarding what is said by different state-owned enterprises. There's just a general cynicism and skepticism amongst the South African public. And this is really, I think, around a few things. The one is, I suspect that it's because there have been in the past so many forms of information, and not so much disinformation, but it's the way that information is interpreted and amplified. So, for example, you will have the the concerns around the depreciation of the rand as an example, not this round, but I think originally, in fact, 2008, 2009, when the blame was then placed on 9/11, and then later on it's been blamed on it's been blamed on ESCOM, and then it's been blamed on COVID. It just seems as though there's always an attempt to deflect internal responsibility and a kind of lack of agency and powerlessness, as opposed to thinking around the sorts of mechanisms and the policy mechanisms, in fact, which we have at our disposal, whether at Reserve Bank level, through the Ministry of Finance, through different taxes and tariffs, which would enable the economy to flow differently. I'm not negating that there are some things that are beyond control and a force majeure like COVID-19, which is completely unpredictable. But I do think that the public might be growing a bit wary of always externalizing the fact that institutions and the people who should have answers don't seem to have the answers that are appropriate or that are satisfactory to them. There seems to be this externalization of blame as well. And I think second to that is that in this externalizing of blame is the misinformation that they'll also then come to the fore. And I'm sort of suggesting that folks should go and look at Mayor Christine Ngunta's minority report regarding the original rand depreciation crisis 22 years ago. It's very unfortunate that we find ourselves in this quagmire yet again, because one of the recommendations at the time and one of the complaints that was made by the banks was that they felt that our Reserve Bank was being too vigilant, was playing too much of a role in our economy, and that they were enforcing overly strict exchange controls, which is exactly what a responsible Reserve Bank should do for the South African rand. It should protect our currency first. And I think that one of the things that's quite unfortunate is that the general distrust in banks and who then gets to have a say in conversations. I don't think that it is the role for external banks to prescribe how the South African Reserve Bank needs to conduct its business on behalf of the South African people, on behalf of the South African rand. So all of these sorts of muddy messages, who is responsible for what, blaming external factors, sometimes creating bogeymen out there, and sometimes I think lacking the veracity to be able to then be very vigilant, especially as media practitioners, to put a line that's quite clear and transparent and to put information out there that isn't rooted in rumors and half truths.
Right. It's a big responsibility. It's a very big responsibility. Well, we're taking your calls. 0117140661. Dinani is on the line in Limpopo. Dinani, good morning to you. Thanks for calling in.
Good morning, Sister Naledi.
Yes, tell us your thoughts, but
yeah, the story here, I think the media is the ear and the eye of the state. And we need the so-called investigative media. Because failure to investigate, failure to report, in the fear of the unknown sometimes, or in the fear of elimination, that means our media is not doing their job.
You make an interesting point when you say that we need more of investigative media. Jamie, yes. I'm going to bring it. Thank you for calling in, Dinani. Thank you for calling in. We're taking more calls, 011-714-0661. Jamie, I'm going to bring it to you. Investigative reporting. Do we have enough of that? Really?
We have sometimes, but I don't think it's consistent across the board. So if you look, for instance, at the Gupta Leaks investigations or the VBS investigations, which some may argue that had political agendas which benefited, some interest in South African society and hence were better funded. But if you look at that, what happened under Gupta Leaks is that you had journalists who were assigned that particular beat, who had to do explainers, podcasts, interviews, write-ups, and some even made books, breaking it down to the South African public. Right. This is what's happening with state capture, with the Gupta Leaks. The same applies to the VBS scandals. We saw multiple explainers on multiple media platforms. We saw graphs, charts, podcasts, you name it, we saw it, to help the public fully understand the complexity of the issue. Even when you think about the murder of Babita Dekoran and the things that were happening in the hospitals in Gauteng, that also had elaborate reporting, digital vibes, the same. However, when it comes to this particular forex cartel story, which is explosive, which is very significant because it even affects the debt repayments that South Africa has to make. Even if 10% of the fall of the rand has been as a result of this manipulation, right? That is significant considering the GDP of South Africa and considering the volume of trades in terms of how much South Africa exports and imports. So I would anticipate that you would need the same standard of reporting that we saw for VBS, that we saw for the Gupta leaks, that we saw for Digital Vibes. We have not seen that. And part of it is because that reliance has been on external funded independent media houses, not necessarily state broadcasters such as the SABC. I think that is where the conflict of interest was most prevalent, because if you look at who funds some of these publications, I won't name them just out of collegiality, but they are funded by the banks in part, or they are funded by bank owners. So it becomes a challenge for those particular media houses to say, we are going to go against our funders more directly.
Yeah, you see, and we still have with us, of course, Mr. Kanki Matabane from the Black Business Council and Mr. Sandile Swana, who is a political analyst. I think we need to bring that particular question back to them as well. I mean, in their view, do we have a balanced sense of resources when it comes to investigative journalism in South Africa, particularly where it has an impact on the economy? We're going to get into that right after this short break. Do stay with Media and Society. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society. Well, we continue our discussion around the story that has broken over the last week around rand manipulation by 28 local, allegedly by 28 local and international banks, believed to have generated over R1 trillion through activities such as price fixing and market allocation. And of course, the facts are still coming to us, but we're talking this morning about whether or not the media has done a good enough job of bringing you that story and explaining to you what impact it has had on you. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, and so we need to almost, I suppose, at this point, Mr. Matabane, start talking about what the directive needs to be from here, right? Before we went into the break, Jamie and I were talking about the resources and where, I suppose, the investigative journalism is coming from in this country as black business and business generally in South Africa. What's the directive from the media right now?
One senses a selectiveness in terms of reporting. And it may be true that the media does not have capacity, but it looks like there's a selectiveness and reluctance when it comes to certain businesses. For example, it has taken Germany to expose what happened in Steinhoff for the media to come on board, and to also basically go back to the example that was given to say VPS and the others. Media puts all the efforts, including writing books about what happened at VPS. But the same effort, for example, was not put on Steinhoff. The same effort is not put on asking questions to say, what is the role of the Reserve Bank in all this? Because the Reserve Bank is supposed to be there to protect the rand. But if it's not protecting the rand, some people are manipulating it. Why is the media not asking those tough questions? So until we get to that sense that there's a reporting without fear or favor, it becomes difficult to also believe the media when they report on certain other matters. So from where we're sitting, I think the media must look at the impact of any case in the South African society and South Africa itself. And because if you look at this case of currency manipulation, as indicated by my other panelists, it's huge. The impact is huge. It affects basically all of us. Procurement of goods, the repayment of the debts that South Africa owes, and all those things. So one would have expected, even last week, that most of the media should have led with, especially on Sundays, the Sunday papers should have led with this in front page, in their front pages. But
it should be the biggest thing that we're talking about. Yeah, Mr. Matabane, unfortunately, I'm cutting you in because I don't have a lot of time. I need to bring in Mr. Sandile Swana to get your thoughts here. And if you will, please keep it as tight as possible. We're saying now, we've watched the story develop over the past week. As we get into the next week, what is your directive to the media? What does the media do now to gain back the trust of the viewer? Your mic again, Mr. Swana.
The simple instruction that I would give would be that, can you then stick with the historical trend of this matter? For instance, just now, Neil Phillips has been convicted for manipulating the rand in Manhattan in the USA. So looking at the trend, what is happening in the area of currency manipulation? What is happening with price fixing and cartels in South Africa? And stick with it for some time. And the lies that were told that nobody can manipulate the rand. People are getting convicted, being successfully able to manipulate the rand. So you need to stay on the line over a number of years. Stay on the line.
Yeah, Mepeko, does the media have the power really to even fix this? I mean, this is essentially what we're talking about. We're gonna have discussions around whether or not the penalty of 42.7 million rand is a slap on the wrist or not. But does the media actually have the power?
I'll tell you what, I mean, there's one thing that's quite clear, and that's really that I think that media need to really stop looking at just daily events with respect and really consider much more structural issues. So, for example, to report this as though this is only happening now, today, rather than, it's impossible to report this without drawing back to the 2001 currency depreciation quagmire. And one of the things as well, if I may just finish the point about that, was that the thing that stood out in Mekunta's minority report was that she said the following, that price manipulation had occurred through rumor mongering, and that spreading rumors deliberately to trigger markets, stock losses, and position parking. So I think the role of information and misinformation, and she explicitly calls it rumor mongering, if it's not factual and located within facts and located within verifiable information, that is really part of a broader conversation about the political economy of the country at large, then we are going to keep getting these spurts of news which don't really add value to a long-standing, ongoing informational flow with which the public can engage meaningfully. Producers, consumers, importers, exporters, and so on can then begin to glean from this. It will remain this sort of spattering of scandalous information rather than something that we can all grow forward from.
Yeah. Christine Kunta, you said.
Yes, Advocate Christine Kunta. She wrote an excellent minority report in 2001. Yeah.
That's a good referral then for our viewers. Jamie, as we wrap it up, you are a young person who has quite the platform and quite the following on social media, and you were particularly very critical of the media at this time. Your directive, right? And I mean, what is your order to the media across the board? And you don't have to specify media houses, but and you can speak about the true cost of not being as clear and honest as we should be.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is necessary are explainers that are accessible to the public, because public pressure has a bearing on these institutions. It has been said earlier that the banks have really portrayed themselves as champions of integrity, as some of the best rated institutions in the world. But if they are rumors, if they are speculative tendencies, if they are brokers who are misbehaving, and we must remember that the number of brokers in South Africa is very small because we have a small number of banks. So it's very easy for this behavior to have a outsized impact, because the number of people participating in the trades is not the same as you would have in America or the UK or other markets. So the media needs to provide explainers. It needs to provide those in video format, as well as the graphs, the charts that we saw in print publications, such as we saw for VBS, such as we saw for Digital Vibes. That is missing. But on the other side, there needs to be investigation around who were the decision makers in those chat rooms? Who were the drivers? We need to know who the brokers were who made the CRE transactions, which were material at material times. This is information which you would typically get from the media when there's a scandal of this size, but it's missing from the public discourse. The fact that we can identify, for instance, that Mr. Neil Phillips was one of the traders in the USA, that is significant. Why do we not know the names of the brokers who profited the most? Why do we not know the names of the CEOs who maybe were involved in some of the decision making around this, or some of the managing directors? This is typically what the media tells us, and it's missing right now. And if we could close those gaps, I think the public could come to the media and say, I trust what you're doing. I see how not only are you holding politicians to account, but you're also holding corporate South Africa to account. Corruption doesn't just happen with government officials. It also happens in the corporate space. And if we don't hold all spaces accountable, South Africa will be vulnerable.
Yeah. And the excuse of the juniorization or resources of the media simply aren't enough.
And there are young media people around the world who are doing quality work. I've seen great YouTube channels, run by 25-year-olds, which are doing good work. So I don't think it's exclusively just about juniorization. I think it's also about editorial agenda, and I think it's also about allocation of resources inside the newsroom to do the work.
Yeah, very critical points. Thank you so much to our guests. This has been an important discussion, and I hope that media practitioners, whether at local level or national level or even international level, have listened to this discussion. Thank you so much to our guest, Melebohang Pheko, who is a political economist, Mr. Sandile Swana, who is a political analyst. We, of course, were joined by Mr. Khangi Matabane of the Black Business Council and director of the Debate Dojo, Jamie Mighti, or Mighty Jamie, as you know him from Twitter. My name is Naledi Mulao. That's how we wrap up Media and Society. Thank you so much for joining us. Have yourselves a fabulous week, and we'll see each other again next week, Sunday.